Hi, everyone. I'm Leah Hines. I'm the Executive Director of the Charleston Hub, and it is my honor to welcome you all to today's webinar, Turn Ideas into Impact, Elevating Student Research Through Digital Humanities. Thank you all for joining us. So while we're getting started, I would ask you to use the attendee chat to say hello and introduce yourself to everyone. Let us know where you're joining from. I'm welcoming you all from sunny South Carolina and happy that you're all here with us today. The session is being recorded, so just a notification that that's taking place, and a link to the video will be provided to everyone who's registered for the session within 2 days. We do ask that you use the Q&A button to submit questions for the panelists. The attendee chat is great for, again, welcoming, saying hello and introducing yourself, comments about the section. But if you have questions that are content related, we ask you to use that Q&A button. And finally, our Charleston Hub's Code of Conduct applies to this event, all of our events, whether they're in person or online, and I'll provide a link to that in the chat in just a moment. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Chris Houghton, who is Head of Academic Partnerships at Gale, and he's going to introduce the rest of the panel. And I'd like to take this moment to also thank Gale for sponsoring this webinar. So thanks, Chris, and the rest of the team, and take it away.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Welcome to Turning Ideas into Impact, Elevating Student Research Through Digital Humanities. My name's Chris Houghton. I'm Head of Academic Partnerships at Gale, which means that I work a lot with the sort of global digital humanities and academic community around bridging the sort of gap between Gale and the community to get access to data, to support research projects, and to support teaching. My colleagues here, Sarah Ketchley is Senior DH Specialist here at Gale and will be introducing herself later on. And Hannah Burrows, one of our recent students. They're going to be talking about a practical example of teaching using the lab and indeed being taught using the lab. So I'm going to spend sort of 10 minutes just talking you through, introducing you to Gale and their Digital Scholar Lab, so that we've kind of got a baseline of knowledge. And I'd encourage everybody to put questions into the Q&A as we go. We're going to make sure that we've got sort of 10-15 minutes at the end to answer as many questions as we possibly can. But before we do, here's the agenda for today. So as I said, I'll be going through who Gale are and the lab itself. I'll be talking about what we're going to be talking about today, which is Gale Digital Scholar Lab projects and the Gale Research Showcase. Then it'll be over to Sarah to talk about teaching with the lab, and Hannah to talk about the student experience. But before any of that, what we thought was that we try and get a bit of insight into you all. I've got a quick 3-question questionnaire for you. There's a QR code there. I've also got a link here that I'm just going to try and pop into the chat so that you can all see it. I'm going to try and send this to everybody if I can, or if I popped it into the chat, then hopefully somebody can pop it into the wider chat for me. But basically what we're looking for is just a little bit of insight into you. You know, these things can often be a little bit of us talking and you listening, and we wanted to make it a little bit interactive to make sure that we're pitching this at the right levels. A question for Leah is if she's preempted my question. She's popped the URL into the chat. Follow that or use the QR code, and you'll see that there are sort of 3 questions. How familiar you are with Gale, how your existing knowledge with digital humanities, and this is on a scale of 1 to 5. Essentially, if you're a 1, then you are a novice. Then you don't know anything about digital humanities. You're brand new to it. This is completely new to you. If you're a 5, you're an expert. You're published. You write your own code, or you know everything there is to know about digital humanities. And then finally, a question on your institution, the priorities therein about developing digital literacies and skills for students, and whether your institution has those kind of priorities or not. It's totally fine either way. So all of this is anonymous, and hopefully, if we're right, if this is all working right, you should be able to input your information in there. And I hope, maybe if I refresh this, let's see. I'm hoping that we should be able to start seeing some results coming through. So Fantastic. A few of you have. That's great. Thank you so much to everybody who's responded already. A lot of you familiar with Gale. That's perfect. So I can skip over some of the introductory stuff. So that's perfect. A few of you not. Your knowledge of digital humanities. We're looking quite a relatively knowledgeable crowd here, which is great. So people sort of saying that they have some knowledge of digital humanities, maybe not kind of complete experts in it, but that's totally fine. And then finally, in terms of priorities for digital literacies and skills, so only 8% of you saying no at the moment, and a lot of you saying yes, or possibly that you're not sure. So this is great. I'm going to give people just 2 or 3 minutes more just to submit their responses so that we get as many responses from everybody as possible. I'll just refresh the screen again just to make sure that all comes through. But I can see, I think that most of you have. And so I'm very grateful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I hope that that at least gives us all a sense of who we all are, and certainly gives us some ideas about who you are so that we can pitch this at exactly the right level. So let me move on. And just to very briefly introduce Gale, I mean, Gale has been around for a long time, since 1954, as a publisher of directories and encyclopedias, but most recently, in the early 2000s, what we've become best known for in an academic context is something like this, is digitizing large-scale sets of primary source materials. This is the Times newspaper, the first page of the Times newspaper from London, the world's newspaper of record, they rather grandly call themselves. And this is before it was even called the Times. This is when it was the Daily Universal Register on the 1st of January, 1785. This is the very first page of the very first edition. And in 2002, this was the first digital archive that we created, turning it from that into this. This is the Times Digital Archive, all the way back from 1785 through to 2019. And in that time, or over that period, I should say, so in the last sort of 22 years, what we've been doing is creating these digital archives, digitizing these materials and making them available to thousands and thousands and thousands of libraries in universities around the world. So that's entirely possibly how you might know us, but you might not know necessarily about Gale Digital Scholar Lab, which is what we're going to be talking about today. This is a product that we bought out nearly 6 years ago now. And this at its heart is an online cloud-hosted text and data mining research environment. So I'm not going to take you through it in very much detail at all, but I want to give you just the brief highlights and certainly show some of the recent developments, because unlike some of the archives, which when we publish them, let's say when we published the Times newspaper back in 2002, we don't necessarily do a lot with it. Once it's been published, it might get a sort of interface refresh after maybe 10 years or so, which is in fact what happened with the Times. But in essence, it's quite a static thing. With something like the Gale Digital Scholar Lab, this is an iterative product. So this is something that develops monthly sometimes, and we bring in new functionality all the time. So I'll just highlight a few bits and pieces. So in essence, this is a platform that sits on top of all of your Gale digital archives that are available to access through your institutional library. And it combines those digital archives with open source analytical tools designed to work upon those archival materials. So it's all integrated in one place and it's all designed to work together. It's a completely no-code environment. So we've designed it, although we're using open source tools that if you went to them on the open web, you would need to know how to code potentially. You would need to know the command line to make them work. In the lab, we put a skin across them so that no coding is necessary, so that you or me or anybody, no matter our level of technical skill, can develop an analysis. And you can create content sets and you can clean and analyze the data. That's the workflow within the lab. We try and make it as extensible as possible. So you can export your OCR or optical character recognition data. That's just the underlying text data that underpins every single archive that we create. Those are what make it full text searchable. But you can export that data, and when it's out of the lab, you can apply your own tools to it or do whatever you want. But you can also export metadata about the data that you've created. We've, over the years, and Sarah's been instrumental in this, developed an awful lot of pedagogical scaffolding. So material to help teach and learn the processes and the methodologies that exist within the lab. And that includes things like instructional support, so sample syllabi and curriculums, and also sample projects. So these are academic written projects that take you through a project in the lab end to end, from ideation, so from developing your research question to interpretation. So reflecting on what you've learned and the process that you've done. Recently, one of the more recent changes in the last sort of 2 or 3 years is the ability to import your own external text data. So if you can express data as a text file, i.e. a .txt file, you can import it into the lab. You can import as much as you like. There are no limits to it. And any student, any user within an institution can use this. So they can upload it into the lab. They can mix it with Gale data if they want to, or they can run it separately through the lab pipeline and analyze it as any other piece of data. Recently, we've also developed group collaborations so that students or researchers can work together on projects, and also a notebook to chronicle project methodology. And this is incredibly important in what we're going to be talking about today. One of the most recent applications, one of the most recent innovations within the lab is the inclusion of Python notebooks. We have 3 new Python notebooks in here. So if a student or a class wants to work on developing coding skills alongside working within the lab, we've got canned Python notebooks that allow you to add scripts or apply scripts to Gale data and to extend the work that you can do within the lab. So this is what we're going to be talking about today, and very, very briefly, I just want to show you the workflow. So we're talking about the recent change that we've made to develop a page that we've called My Research, and within that, the projects page. We can see this is the My Research page, and it has 3 buckets within it. It has your content sets. Think of these as your sort of experiments. These are the investigations that you would do, or any user would do when they're using the lab. You have your notebook. That is where you chronicle your project methodology. So you're making notes as you go through, and it all flows up and rolls up into the notebook. And finally, you have your projects. And this is what I'll explain today. So projects start with the projects dashboard. This is where all of my projects exist, and here are a few that I've created. When we build a project, what you're able to do is basically bring in material from your content set and your content sets and your notebook and collate it all in one space. You're able to easily bring it together and reorder it. You're able to structure it by adding headings and subheadings and basically put it into the format of what would be a presentable project. Once you've done with that, you can preview this, and this is the preview. This shows you what the project would look like, and then you have the ability to submit this. So a new piece of functionality that we've added to the lab is the addition of a peer review process. Every 6 months we will be hiring DH experts to perform simple peer review that students or any early career researcher can apply to get a sort of 1-stage peer review and feedback on their methodology. And this will be free. This is the output. This is what a project might look like, including the narrative context and the analysis or visualizations. And as Hannah's going to show, you can also bring external data into this as well. And then finally, once a project has been through peer review and the changes have been implemented to it, students or early career researchers can apply to have their work added to a free open showcase that we're calling the Gale Research Showcase. This is, as I said, completely free, completely open to everybody. This is a collection of early career researcher authored work available for everybody as templates for how to use the lab and how to maybe construct and think about their own projects. And I thought I just finished with a quote. We did a lot of work when we were designing the research showcase, and I really like this quote here. This is from Caroline Greeny, who's a DH Master's graduate at Brandeis. She says, "I remember when I got started, I was kind of on my own, even with a digital librarian residence. It would have been really good for me to see peer research and even motivating." And with that thought, I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Dr. Sarah Ketchley. Sarah.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar today. My name is Sarah Ketchley, and I trained as an Egyptologist, primarily work with 19th century Nile travel journals, and I'm a lecturer at the University of Washington in Middle Eastern languages, where I've run an internship program in DH for about a decade now, and I also teach introductory level classes in digital humanities to undergraduate and graduate students. I'm also the senior digital humanities specialist at Gale. So for this section of the presentation, I want to discuss how I use Gale Digital Scholar Lab learning as the learning method, considering some of the moving parts that make for a successful outcome. I'm going to use some of my own classroom examples as a model, but what I talk about can be generalized to disciplinary or DH-specific classes across many fields. I'm going to touch on some examples of the course materials that I've developed, including syllabi, learning outcomes, and rubrics, and show you how the lab can be used to provide students with a streamlined project building experience, beginning with the initial collection of data, through the process of generating research outcomes through text and data mining, and then creating flexible and detailed final assignments that can be submitted as part of class requirements or submitted to the new research, Gale Research Showcase. So when I begin designing a syllabus, I use this model, which incorporates the key components of project-based learning, or PBL. I found that it's particularly suitable for work in digital humanities, which is inherently collaborative and project-based. I use these PBL key attributes as a kickoff point for framing the work that I'll be asking for students to complete. And this model of asking questions, developing research, giving students autonomy and authority, and then going through a process of refinement before creating a final digital exhibit creates an iterative inquiry-led learning environment, which I found is extremely important for leading students through the process of developing a DH project with an appropriate level of rigor, but also encourages perseverance and critical thinking. With this broad PBL framework in mind, this tends to be the flow of each class that I teach in a very simplified format. So it begins with the introductory foundations at the base of the pyramid, and these progress over the course of a 10-week quarter to the apex of the final project. The foundational content includes project planning, such as discussions of copyright, data management, risk assessment, collaborative working practices, and so on, before moving forward to data collection and curation using primary source archives, which are always based on the theme of the particular class that I'm teaching. These themes vary each quarter, but they usually include a range of historical narratives or compiled data sets of primary source documents, which students can choose from as part of their group project. Once students have finished gathering and cleaning their data, we move forward to analysis and visualization using Gale Digital Scholar Lab. And we use the lab in association with external tools like Voyant, Lexos, Jeffy, and so on. They document their weekly work, and then they export their analysis results for inclusion in their final project, which could be an individual project if it's an asynchronous online class, for example, and they use tools like StoryMap.js or Timeline.js to display their project work. Or if it's a group project, we will often use an open source content management system like Omeka to build a digital exhibit, or indeed create a project in the Gale Research for submission to the Gale Research Showcase. This is that pyramid model broken out in a slightly different way, and it highlights some of the digital literacies that students learn and engage with in class. I found that it's important to give students an understanding of the types of skills that they're learning so that they can articulate these clearly and tie them to potential career paths. The skills that they learn in class include photovisual literacy, so they come to understand the workflows, instructions, and messages when they're presented in graphical formats. And these might range from individual icons and symbols within a platform to navigating an entire graphical user interface like the lab, for example. Reproduction literacy essentially means creating new meaning or interpretations from disparate information which is presented in various formats. Information literacy means that students are able to assess large volumes of data, for example, primary source archives, and they can objectively count irrelevant material while demonstrating an awareness of potential bias or falsehood. We have branching literacy, which is where students learn to navigate a hypermedia environment, which is often quite complex and includes various knowledge domains, while they have to remain oriented and focused on their core research and learning tasks with the goal of creating a final project. And then finally, and importantly, socio-emotional literacy means understanding the rules for effective, respectful, and sensitive engagement in both an online and in-person environment, including a willingness to share knowledge while working and learning collaboratively. The second graphic here I quite like because it calls out some of the skills which are judged to be increasing in importance between now and 2027, which map to the digital literacies that I've just mentioned, that students develop as they work through a project-based collaborative syllabus in a classroom, which includes or incorporates digital humanities or digital scholarship methodologies. The graphic on the left, incidentally, is taken from an article that I co-wrote with one of my graduate students, which is available in the special digital literacy edition of DH and Lib. It's linked from here. So thinking specifically about classroom planning using Gale Digital Scholar Lab, there's a range of pedagogical learning center, which Chris mentioned. And this is designed to support instructors as they develop their syllabi. There are suggested strategies for creating a project-based learning workflow, and this includes sample and project outlines. There are sample learning objectives, syllabi and rubrics, along with a growing collection of pre-curated primary source data sets to kickstart classroom project building and student engagement. We have the 3 Python notebooks for named entity recognition, GIS, and sentiment analysis, which are very customizable outside of the lab for specific classroom needs. Institutions that subscribe to the lab also have access to a dedicated DH team, which does include Chris and myself, for conversations about course development and pedagogy with the lab. So as I develop my own courses, I became defining the end goals, so the endpoint I'd like to get. And these are essentially the learning objectives for the specific class that I'm teaching. I always provide tiered objectives, and you can see an example of that here, which is also downloadable from the lab. And this helps me ensure that I can meet the needs of both novices in the class, since my classes are always no prerequisite and no previous experience. But I always have a number of students who do bring existing experience to I provide additional advanced learning objectives or outcomes for those students, so they have some stretch goals. Then I think about the skills that students need to develop to successfully meet those learning objectives. And I take those on the next slide into my syllabi. I feed them into the syllabi that I create, which at the University of Washington cover a 10-week period or a quarter. Is an introductory level class in humanities, following the model that I've been discussing so far, beginning with a foundational section, planning and understanding, before moving on to more hands-on work, interpretation of data, of analysis and visualization, before finally project building and working on front-end display and narrative content. Each week provides a range of a lot of opportunities for hands-on practice and experimentation with different text analysis tools. As I've mentioned, both the learning and the syllabi are available for download and reuse in the curriculums material section of the Digital Scholar Lab. So on the next slide, I've touched on my expectations for weekly assignments during my classes. I always ask students to keep a detailed log of the work that they've completed, both individually and within their groups. And this enables them to get used to creating effective project documentation, while also keeping a record of decisions during the process of data compilation and curation, of cleaning and of text analysis. These records help them make thoughtful interpretations of analysis outputs, and it also enables them to reproduce and test their work. And as such, the records are an important component of final project assignments. The lab is very well suited in terms of students working together. The group space enables them to build out their content sets, and instructors have full control of building a group within the lab. They can add students by institutional email address to a specific group. And in doing so, they can also add class TAs so that everybody can be aware of work that's going on in individual groups. Students can then work together to clean and analyze their content sets. There is provision to take notes on every page of the process, and these notes are visible to all group members. And as an instructor, I'm grateful for this, because it enables me, as I review the notes, to see gaps in understanding that students have, which I can then address in the next class session, in the next live session. So on the next slide, we have an example of rubrics. So assignment and discussion post rubrics go hand in hand with supporting student learning outcomes. They describe the expectations for each component of work that students do. And I spend considerable time trying to make my rubrics quite granular, which, as well as enabling me to grade and fairly, and for my TAs to do the same. It also offers students the scaffolding that they need to do each aspect of their work effectively. So, for example, the rubric for a final class digital exhibit, which you can see here, lays out all the expected components for students, such as an introductory page, an about page describing the team and their roles, and then pages related to analysis and visualization. The points weighting provides for students, it indicates to them where they should devote the most time and effort to. The rubric then provides students with a wireframe to follow as they build out their digital exhibits. And it can also be used as a template in the lab, in the project workspace. Each component can be used as a separate block to build out a project within the lab as well. So on the next slide, and to zoom out briefly, I wanted to touch on all the moving parts that bring the DH classroom to life. And these range from support and expertise provided by librarians to institutional web hosting, provision of necessary software subscriptions, to a diverse range of tools and technical documentation maintained by the DH community. it's always worth taking an inventory of resources available to you at your institution during the planning stage of syllabus development. And my classes have benefited from contributions by the copyright and metadata librarians, for example, and through Omeka workshops provided by the library's digital scholarship team, which have been recorded and then made available to the broader University of Washington community. And of course, they help me to troubleshoot these installations as well. Gale Digital Scholar Lab sits within this broad ecosystem as a research and pedagogical tool. It has always acted as the starting point in my classroom for data collection and analysis, while it also offers considerable flexibility for students to import and remove their data and analysis products, use and experiment with other tools. The new projects and showcase features complete the set available in the lab, offering students the opportunity to participate in the full research and publication life cycle of a project over the course of a quarter's work. The showcase features that Chris touched on are appealing from a classroom standpoint. Students are generally very keen to see their work published online as an open resource for others. And this also gives them an accessible record of their class contributions, which provides an additional resume piece for them. The opportunity to go through the review and feedback process is really useful. And it's something that we experience in our jobs regularly, of course. It gives students the opportunity to iteratively improve their work to publication standard as well. The project students have completed in each of my classes and have always been published on the University of Washington's Open Scholarship Commons. They're available there now, where they provide an accessible and hopefully inspiring record for other students, other instructors to look for inspiration as they build out their own syllabi, or for researchers looking for research information and data. And this is exemplified by the material on our King Tut Centenary class exhibit page, which includes data sets, transcriptions of newspaper reporting, documenting the discovery of King Tut in 1922, which is preserved in the Times of London Digital Archive, which Chris mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. So we had a cohort of graduate MLIS students who did their capstone project on this data. We have created a complete data set of transcriptions of the Times exclusive agreement. And this work is not available elsewhere. And so it's an invaluable resource for Egyptologists and the general public working in the sphere, in the Egyptological sphere. So it is, both a record of classroom engagement, but it also is a research project in its own right, and available on the UW site. On the next slide, you can see that many of the student projects on the UW website are now also available in the Gale Research Showcase. And these range from in-depth analyses of some of the data sets available in the lab to new research exploring the reading habits of an archaeological draftsman in Egypt. Hannah is going to talk in detail about one such project. I've provided a QR code on this slide, which goes directly to the showcase so that you can explore yourself. So without further ado, I'm delighted now to hand over to Hannah, who's going to talk about her experience as a student. So over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Professor. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Burrows, and as the professor just mentioned, I am a recent undergraduate student, so I've recently graduated, and I have taken many of the professor's classes and also TA'd for one. So yeah, I'm here to discuss the student experience of using Gale's Digital Scholar Lab to complete a project and then publish it on the research showcase. Next slide, please. So as a bit of background, in the spring of my second year, I took the class that Professor Ketchley was just talking about, Digital Media, King Tut, and Digital Humanities. And at the time, I had very little experience with digital humanities and basically no knowledge of it. The class itself was 10 weeks long, and it sought to introduce students to the field of digital humanities through a quarter-long group project, which would answer research questions connected to the uncovering of King Tutankhamun's tomb. Because that year was the 100-year anniversary of the discovery. Essentially, undergraduate students were asked to pick their own topics and work through basically most of the research process. We formulated our own research questions, we decided on the project's scope and a timeline, and then we had to mine data to answer the questions, clean that data, choose the best tools to answer our research questions, use those tools to run analyses of the data, and then interpret the results, and ultimately create a public deliverable that included at least 3 smaller sub-deliverables. So that public deliverable in our project's case was an Omeka exhibit. So my group chose to focus on the idea of how the Pharaoh's Curse was represented in English language newspapers in the years surrounding the uncovering of the tomb. And we wanted to see how, if at all, the sentiment and volume of newspaper coverage about the curse changed during that time period, if the discovery of the tomb affected that at all, and also if there were any topics that were frequently connected to the curse and King Tut. Next slide, please. So for this project, every group, including mine, used Gale's Digital Scholar Lab in many stages. So first, we used Gale's archives to find the documents that we wanted to use as data in our project. So specifically, we wanted to use the scanned text or plain text version of newspaper articles from the 1910s to the 1940s that were related to the curse or King Tut, and specifically in English. And Gale had tons of search features and tools in the lab's build step that helped us with finding those articles and compiling them into a content set, which became the data for our project. Unfortunately, because most of the documents were very old, sometimes the text wasn't the easiest for a computer to read, so we would end up with OCR errors or optical character recognition errors. But we were able to correct those and essentially clean the data using the lab's cleaning tools, so like the replacement tool and the stop words tool. And then we used that newly cleaned data in the lab's analysis tools. For example, because one of my group's questions asked if the sentiment around the curse and the tomb changed over time, we used our data in the lab's sentiment analysis tool to generate a graph of sentiment over time, which we then analyzed and used as one of our 3 sub-deliverables. So at the time of this class and project, the notebook and project tools hadn't been developed yet. The lab is developing all the time, and those just didn't exist at the time of my project. So my group and I kept our process notes in Google Docs, and we wrote up our interpretations of our results and our final report in Omeka. But the notebook and project tools kind of remove the need to do that, which allows students to complete even more of the process in one place. Which would definitely be more convenient than hopping around between a bunch of different platforms and trying to export the data between them and transfer across. And it would also allow for just better collaboration between the group members throughout the project. So in my project, our group and I had separate process notes, right? But that could often lead to some confusion about what had been done, what still needed to be done, what we had decided was going to be done, which the notebook tool would kind of fix. And we also had to write our individual sections of the report separately and then combine them all in Omeka because we didn't have live editing there, which kind of led to some of the writing feeling somewhat stilted or disconnected. Using a project tool instead and using the notebook notes that you already had would help fix a lot of those issues. Next slide, please. So I recently learned about the projects and the ability to publish them to the research showcase, and I was very excited to hear about that, and I wanted to try transferring our work that we had done and publishing it to the showcase. So firstly, to do that, I needed to transfer my process notes and analyses over into the notebook because they weren't already there, which is a very simple process of mostly copying and pasting and adding some simple formatting. Next, please. But this was only necessary because, as previously mentioned, no notebook. So I had that in different places, but most other students or early stage researchers would already have their work in the notebook and could skip this step. Next, please. So after we have everything in the notebook, we can just select all of the relevant notes that we want to include in the project and import them all at once. Next, please. And then we can drag them into the correct order that we want them to appear in the final report. Next, please. Then we can add headings. Next, please. And then we can also add images as well, either directly from the results of the tools, which can just be added to the notebook and imported in, or we can upload them directly from the computer if we have external things we want to include. Next, please. And we can also add interactive elements with some limited HTML code. So for example, one of my group's smaller deliverables was an interactive timeline of events related to the curse created with a tool called Timeline.js. And that tool provides an iframe reference, which I was able to just embed directly into a section in the project. And I could interact with it normally, and all of that functionality was still there, which was really cool. Next, please. At any point, you can use the preview button to see what the work will look like, so you can correct any issues as needed. Next, please. And if the preview looks all good, then you can click the submit button, which will send the project off for essentially peer review. Next, please. And that step will give students feedback on their project, and then they can edit it as they needed or if they want to. Next, please. And then if the project is approved, it can be publicly published on the research showcase. Next, please. Yeah, so I just ran through that whole process, and it seems like a lot, but it really is quite simple and easy to follow when you're actually doing it. It feels a lot more doable. And there's a whole bunch of benefits to going through that process for students. Firstly, this gives students the opportunity to experience the entire research process. In my experience, I found that a lot of the research process can be covered in different classes, like collecting data, running surveys, or analyzing that data, or doing the final write-up, but peer review is a step that is often not quite covered or available, either because of a lack of time or there just isn't a way to have peer reviewers because it's other students and they don't know what they're doing in peer review either. So publishing to the showcase and getting that opportunity to have something like the peer review process allows students like some good practice in getting and using constructive feedback. But it's also just good to get to experience more of that process if a student wants to pursue research further. And speaking of which, this process can help students discover if they enjoy research and might be interested in pursuing it further, like whether extracurricularly or in graduate school or as a career. A lot of students might, especially undergraduate students, might not have the chance to get to experience doing research before, or they might feel intimidated by the idea of doing it. I know I was at first. It seemed like a super long process, very difficult to do, but going through a whole project in the Gale Scholar Lab or through a class like Professor Ketchley's made it a lot easier and made it feel a lot more doable. Because you just do one step at a time and move through it. And then at the end, you can look back and be like, wow, I did a lot. So it just makes it feel less intimidating, and then also helps you get that experience with the research process, which can help you decide or maybe discover if you enjoy it and want to pursue it further. And then lastly, this process provides something for students or early career researchers to put on their resume and point potential employers to. From what I've seen, a lot of or certain employers prefer or require students or applicants to have publications on their resume, especially if you're looking at a research position. But that conflicts in that a lot of undergraduate students having opportunities to have their name on a publication can be rare or difficult to find. So having a convenient way to conduct that research and have the results published and have your name attached to that document is just really beneficial for students in general, especially those trying to get into research positions or apply to graduate schools. And that is everything from me. I think Chris had a few things to wrap up with.
Absolutely. Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, I thought I would just sort of finish it all off with a few thoughts. I wanted to flag the fact that the lab is iterative and will continue to develop. This year, we're going to be seeing a rejigged homepage, but also additions to the tools. Either the underlying algorithms are going to be updated to the sort of latest versions, but also, I think later in the year, we're going to be changing some of the tools, the way that they sort of adding functionality to the way that they operate, or indeed the visualizations available to them. So it's the kind of thing that is always improving. And one thing that we try very hard to do is to make sure that we're using the researcher voice when we're doing these things, and all of these changes, all of these iterations, all of these developments that you've seen today, all of that comes from an awful lot of customer feedback. So I'd encourage you, if your school has the lab, to contact Sarah or myself and let us know what you'd like to see in it. I'd point you in the direction of a lot of support. There is an absolute ton of support within the lab. Sarah's kind of touched on an awful lot of it in terms of blogs, but there are also webinars, and our fabulous outreach team do free training whenever is necessary, remotely and in person, available throughout the US and Canada and the rest of North America. And then finally, a plea from Sarah and myself, we talked about us as part of the Digital Humanities team. Part of what we do is we work with classes, we work with instructors, partner with them to really maximize the use of the lab at institutions. All of our work is free as part of the agreements that institutions sign up with Gale for. And we're delighted to work with instructors, work with classes to get them best using the lab, embedding it, and hopefully outputting more projects into the showcase. But with that, I'd like to say a big thank you to Sarah and especially to Hannah for their great presentation. I really appreciate it. Really fabulous. I'm not sure I'd have had the confidence to do that as a recent undergraduate. So congratulations, Hannah. Now I think it's kind of over to everybody else. As I say, thank you. And what questions do we have?
Thanks, Chris and Sarah and Hannah, for that great presentation. We do have a question from John. He asked for some elaboration about what sorts of training or tutorials are available to faculty. He said, this is all very exciting, but most humanities faculty will need training on these tools before we can train our students. And he acknowledged that Chris sort of answered that question already, but some elaboration would be helpful. No
problem at all. I mean, Sarah, maybe if I throw it over to you as our resident sort of North American expert, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. Well, on Chris's final slide, he referenced some of the online resources that we provide, which are available at gale.com. We have a full suite of recorded webinars introducing the lab. We have full walkthroughs and then tool-specific or cleaning-specific webinars, which are available on demand. We are also available to provide synchronous, so online or in-person trainings to our subscribing institutions as well. We have an excellent academic outreach team who are very well versed in training librarians, faculty and students to answering questions. And then Chris and I are also available to weigh in on specific technical, methodological or pedagogical questions. We're happy to partner directly with faculty to provide that training. Also to provide introductory sessions on Gale primary sources themselves, so the underlying data that users work with, so full archival exploration. In a nutshell, feel free to reach out via email. You have both our email addresses here, and we'll be happy to figure out customized opportunities on an institution by institution basis. So thank you for your question.
Thank you. Any other questions from our audience? Or in the meantime, Chris, Sarah, Hannah, do you have any other final comments or anything to add while we're waiting for any additional questions?
No, only to say sort of thank you for inviting us. Thank you for having us here. It's been really good. Thank you to everybody for attending. And as Sarah said, our doors are always open. Our emails and contact details are there. Do please get in touch about any kind of aspect of collaboration, from whether you're a sort of DH expert and you're thinking about how you might use the data in a more in-depth way, or get access to sort of in-depth metadata. That's something we can certainly help you to do by plugging you into sort of Gale networks. But also, as Sarah said, you know, with fully supporting you with using the lab, and with supporting your students to create projects and to get them through and published onto the Gale Research Showcase. Yeah, don't be afraid to ask is my final takeaway, I think.
That's great. John says, thanks. That's very helpful. Acknowledgement from him as well. Well, if there are no further, let's see here. We do have another question from Adam about the peer review process. Could you elaborate on that process a bit more? I wonder if it might be a model for incorporating peer review of DH projects for the purpose of tenure and promotion review at the faculty level.
Thanks, Adam. Great question. Our idea with this, and indeed with the showcase, is to sort of start fairly small and contained, and to sort of make sure that we can do it and get it working, and then, you know, having kind of proved the concept, build on it. So this is something that's been live for about 2 months now, so it's very much in its infancy. The peer review process is, our idea is that there are 2 peer review windows in June and December, to sort of roughly equate to end of semesters, end of terms in sort of a lot of the Northern Hemisphere teaching, although obviously with sort of institutions around the world, this hopefully this sort of syncs up with teaching and research. In those windows, what we'll be doing is hiring DH experts, methodological experts, academics well versed in this kind of thing. It's between us, Sarah and I and the rest of the DH team, and these DH experts will be taking on the peer review, looking at these projects from a purely kind of methodological standpoint. So we're not planning to kind of get in too much into the sort of subject or the topic nuts and bolts, but really look at the methodology and provide a few bits of feedback. It's going to be a fairly simple thing, a sort of one-shot piece of feedback where it doesn't sort of iterate over and over again, but where we can provide sort of relatively comprehensive feedback to the student or early career researcher group or individual, and then they have the option, if they want to incorporate that feedback into their project, resubmit, and that will go into the showcase. A sort of fairly small, manageable process to begin with, so that we can, as this is sort of completely new for us, this is Gale going into sort of new territory, and we're really trying to make sure that we get it right. But from there, certainly we can think about, as you suggest, kind of building it up, so that we're able to provide potentially in the future sort of more complex feedback and review for digital humanities projects by kind of more expert users. I hope that answers that one, John.
And I will just add that over the course of the last decade or so, the process of reviewing digital projects has been evolving from, you know, Jeffrey Rockwell's article in 2012 right through to reviews in digital humanities and the MLA guidelines for reviewing digital scholarship. So this is something that we take on board, we're aware of, and our goal is to provide you know, quality, actionable feedback to students and early career researchers who submit to our showcase.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? We're almost to the end of our time together. If there are no other questions, I'll wait just another moment, but I do want to again thank Chris and Sarah and Hannah for their wonderful presentation, and thank all of our attendees for taking the time to join us, and thank Gale for sponsoring this webinar today. If there are no other questions, then we'll close and give you 3 minutes back of your day. But this has been a great time to talk and learn more about the digital humanities, and I appreciate everyone being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
we'll send that recording out to everyone who's registered very shortly, but within 2 days. So thanks a lot, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you at the next Charleston Hub webinar. Bye.